So you previously mentioned how drought and the climate crisis is also impacting the situation in the Middle East, and I think in the Horn of Africa this is something that the Ukraine-Russia crisis has really exacerbated, because in the Horn of Africa we've seen prolonged drought, and I suppose in the short term, in countries like Somalia, at the moment there are like 6 million people in need of critical humanitarian support. And if you look at the region as a whole, it's about 23 million people that are suffering from severe hunger. So these are in countries like Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia. And I'm sure the figure's also high in Sudan. And on top of this, rain has been really scarce during March and early April. And insufficient rainfall has also been forecast during the rainy season for most of sub-Saharan Africa. And this is for the third year in a row. So in parts of Kenya, for example, which are, in central Kenya, which are suffering from drought, there are concerns of conflict between herders and farmers over resources, water, pasture. And when you look at Ethiopia as well, the inflation rate is currently about 35%. And food prices have also skyrocketed, and like Tunisia as well, we've seen unemployment reach sort of new record levels. And I think the sort of living conditions have obviously not improved because of fuel prices and food prices as well. And as a result, many bakeries have shut down, and we've seen long lines around fuel stations in places like Sudan, where we've seen there has been a reported rise in crime in Khartoum. And I think as living conditions worsen, more people will be pushed towards desperation. And I think, something like a rise in crime is something that we'll see much more of, not just in Sudan, but in other regions and countries around the world, really.
Yeah, you mentioned conflict and pushing towards conflict, and like an interesting example, it's not the same, and I'm not going to claim that it is the same, but as an example from Central Asia is on the border between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, which is notoriously quite a hostile border these days, with small clashes between border forces becoming quite regular these days. But what's often not known about these clashes is that they are generally speaking over water resources and agricultural land. And one of the issues with these clashes is that they take place in a border region that's, as with many disputed borders, is very poorly demarcated. So not only that, it traverses some of the best farmland in the area. So I suspect as more pressure is put on the domestic food production systems, issues, seemingly small issues such as possession over small areas of farmland, may become very significant security threats. And in a context such as Central Asia or Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, where there's pre-existing conflict there already between the two over water resources and farmland, it's not hard to see how both sides may be pushed to a more confrontational stance on this border when it comes to disputes over farmland, even if it's a small, and a lot of these disputes do start over very small issues, as you said, with your example between clashes between agricultural communities. In Central Asia, it's often between agricultural communities, and it's often over ownership of quite small areas of land when you think about it in the grand scheme of things. But then when you see how important this land is, it makes a lot of sense. So I think the push, you also mentioned crime, so I think this push towards insecurity, both military and criminal insecurity, I think is almost a direct link. I think it almost goes without saying, doesn't it? But it's quite a broad link, but it's certainly something that pretty much every analyst is predicting, I think.
Yeah, that's also one of my worries for Latin America, where the socioeconomic conditions that lead to crime and migration will only become worse. You always see, whenever, even during the pandemic, but also during like natural disasters, you always see these food aid packages with cartel or drug bosses on top of them, because whether it's like cartels in Mexico or guerrillas in Colombia or gangs in Haiti, they always try to take advantage of the poorest of society or the most vulnerable for recruitment and for influence. So that's definitely one of my concerns, that it will just fuel not only the crime organizations, but also it will just push people to go towards illegal activities like growing illegal crops or illegal mining, stuff like that. One example that happened like in 2010 in Mexico, there was a really steep hike in fuel prices, and it led to a whole new criminal economy around fuel theft. So yeah, it started small scale, but these organizations have grown into like proper organized groups where they usually use corrupt officials within the state-owned oil companies to find the weak spots in the pipelines, or where to hijack like convoys of fuel tankers. So in Mexico it's called huachicoleo, or the guys who do it is huachicoleros, and it's become like not only a massive economy, but also massive criminal activity, but also like there's also already this whole cult of a baby Jesus with the fuel tank, and it's grown like tremendously. And if you see a graph with the prices of fuel and the amount of fuel theft that's being recorded, it's like 1-on-1. So the price of fuel directly impacts the type of fuel theft that's going on across the country.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think there's been a rise in smuggling and fuel smuggling, I think between Guinea and Guinea-Bissau, and Guinea and Mali as well. And I think one thing that we have to pay attention to as well is what sort of prices fuel is sort of sold at in these countries. So in Guinea, for example, it's subsidized, and if it's not subsidized in countries neighboring Guinea or even beyond, then I think we'll see an increase in fuel smuggling. But going back to humanitarian organizations and IDPs, I think if we see, like certainly in the long term and short term, if we see conflict really sort of spread and we see IDPs increase and humanitarian organizations can't meet their needs, then there's a risk that these terrorist organizations, for example, or insurgent groups, they could sort of their ranks could really rapidly expand, or we could also see many IDPs just go back to their villages and end up paying a tax to these sort of groups, and this could also have an impact on the security side of it, because then we could see these groups become more powerful.
Thanks for watching this extract of the Roundtable. If you want to listen to the full episode, search for Intelligence Fusion wherever you get your podcast from.